Good evening, everyone. We are now in First Kings chapter 18. First Kings chapter 18 begins this way: noun, and this really means and then. In a historical narrative description, this sequential event would have happened after chapter 17, after some time. And so the context should gives us some idea how long after that. And so in verse 1, it says, "It happened after many days that the word of the Lord came to Elijah." Now, again, the word of the Lord is the same expression that an audible voice is heard either in the form of a dream or a form of a vision. And it happened here in the third year. Now, this idea of the third year needs a bit of explanation. Bear in mind, the way that it's calculating is we've got the first year and the second year and the third year. Now, the way that is understood is like this: there's part of a year, and then we have another year, which is a full year. And then in the third year, it could be part of a year. And so the way that the Hebrew language works is this is known as the first year, the second year, and then in the third year is sometime in this period of time. And so it doesn't mean 3 years have passed. It means at least one full year have passed, and a part of this year have also passed. And in the third year, it is also a part year. And hence, this is in the third year. And God gave the instruction this way. It says, go, and the idea of go here is to walk. And then it says here, present yourself to Achav. Now, this word present yourself literally means to be seen. To be seen. And so you should go and be seen towards Achav, meaning to go and show yourself. Let Achav see you. And that is how this phrase is seen. The focus is on the idea of seeing in a passive form, Elijah to be seen, and the focus is that to let Achav see him. Now we have the second part here is the word I, and the and is not a sequential. It's and I will provide rain on the faces of the Adamah. So God is telling Elijah, uh, Eliyahu, uh, Eliyahu to tell him to describe this event to the king, that while the no rain situation, it is not natural. It must be seen as a supernatural event. And the supernatural event has to do with defiance of Jehovah. And the idea of defiance here is about idolatry. And this would be in chapter 16. And so yesterday when we read about that, there is the element of no rain. And as no rain happens, the water starts to dry up. The harvest is less, but there is still rivers flowing. And the rivers will eventually flow less and stop flowing. But there are also this phenomena in the land of Israel, which would be subterranean springs. Lots of them, actually. But it is not enough to actually feed the entire country. And so here, God wants to show Achav that this lack of rain is not natural, it is supernatural and is done by God. In verse 2, it says, and then Elijah went to show himself. This is the idea, to show himself to Achav. Now, the famine was severe in Samaria. Now, the idea of famine here is really about hunger. The word famine is a modern English word. The word in Hebrew is the element of being famished. There is lack of food. By lack of food, we're talking about lack of grain, like wheat, barley, and even corn. And it was very severe in Samaria. Now, yesterday we had talked about two other places, Sidon or Sidon, of where the woman who was a widow came from. And then it was Judah. It wasn't so bad in Sidon. It is still famine, but Judah does not seem to be affected. But here in Samaria, which would be north of the land, that's where King Achav rules. Now, in verse 3, we begin to have an introduction to a gentleman by the name of Obad Yahu. Achav summoned Obadiah, that's the English name. The Hebrew name is Obad Yahu. Obad Yahu. And he is not a native of the land. So I need to highlight this and we'll see. So not a native, meaning not of the 12 tribes. Because of his name, he is likely to be the prophet Obadiah who had written the book of Obadiah. And hence that Obadiah, being not a native, is likely to be an Edomite from Edom. And so Obadiah is prophetic about the Edomites. But he was in charge of the household of Achav. And we are told as a background now, Obad Yahu, he feared the Lord greatly. Tells us something. Achav does not fear God. He's the king. But the head of his household is Obadiah, Obad Yahu, and he fears God greatly. That's just the total opposite of Achav. And largely, the household is blessed because Obadiah or Obad Yahu, being fearful of God, uh, through his loyalty and faithfulness to God, that household appears to be prosperous. Verse 4. Now, verse 4 tells us a few interesting things. For when Itze, Itzebel, Itzebel, or Itzebel would be the way it is pronounced. She killed the prophets. Now, this one killed is caused the prophets to be killed. Cause to kill. What this means is not Jezebel picking up the knife. It is Jezebel giving the instructions that the prophets of the Lord were killed. And here, let me just give a sidebar. I had mentioned yesterday that when Elijah was introduced, I had mentioned that there were many other prophets. And herein lies the hint again that besides Elijah, here there were many prophets, and many of them were killed. Obadiah took 100 prophets and hid them by 50s in a cave. So by 50s means in two groups, and provided them with bread and water, and he had to scour around. Now, this is by fear of God that he went to save these 100 prophets. And so, besides Elijah, there are other prophets, many killed, but 100 of them were hidden and saved by Obadiah. Now, that's how it's read. And so, although the text focuses on Elijah, we are every now and then given the hint that there are the existence of other prophets of God. They are not mentioned by name, and their prophecies and prophetic work is not documented because they are very local in their work. Whereas Elijah is documented possibly because the works that Elijah did is applicable to the future generations, hence the documentation. Now, in verse 5, the king Achav says, and then Achav said to Obadiah, there is now a dearth of water. So let's walk across the land to all the springs of water. Now, the idea of springs of water here really talks about the eyes, that the water that comes out from the ground. So if you think of it this way, that if this was the land, springs is understood as underground subterranean chambers in high pressure, and it pushes itself out and it flows out as a possible stream, but it comes from an eye of the ground. And so this is called springs of water or eyes of water. And this is subterranean. And the hope was for them to go to all the springs of water in the land, to all the river valleys. Now, the river valleys are what we call the torrential valleys or the wadi. That's a more Arabic terminology, but they are little brooks that collects water from all the hills that may have some form of liquid that flows down. Now, understand that it is not all over the place, but perhaps there were. That's what Achav is hoping to find. And it says, perhaps we will find grass and keep the livestock and not have to kill some of the cattle. And so now they are hoping that God might just preserve some water, that although the people may suffer, that the livestock may be saved. In verse 6, and then they divided the land between themselves. And this word to survey literally means to pass through. And so if you have a piece of land, passing through would mean that one person would be going all over, and then the other person will also go all over. This is in the English terminology, they use the word survey, but idea is to look for springs of water and all the wadi. Hopefully there is some grass there. So Achav went one way by himself, and Obadiah went another way by himself. So basically, each of them had divided the work to look for existence of water and perhaps something for the livestock to eat. Come to verse 7. And then Obadiah was on the way. Behold, Elijah met him. Now, this word met is not about seeing, it really means to encounter him. And so the idea of encounter means uh, it could be friendly, it could be hostile. And the idea of encounter means Elijah was walking one way, and we have Obadiah walking the other way. And somehow there was a chance meeting. That is what it means to encounter. And immediately, Obadiah recognized him, fell on his face, and said, "Is it you, Elijah, my Adoni?" Now, fell on his face is literally to come and bow down. And this would be paying obeisance. Now, there are a few words that is translated this way. This word is about falling down on his face, and it's all the way down to the ground, and it's also a form of prostrating. This means that Obadiah understood that he is smaller than Elijah and calls him my master, Adoni. And this is a form of reverence that in recognition of who Elijah is. Verse 8, and then he said to him. Now, sometimes these are a bit more cryptic. This will be Elijah said to him, Obadiah. And Elijah said this, it is I. So that he's not mistaken. Go and say to your master, behold, Elijah is here. Now, this word go and say to your master means your Adon. And this would be Akav. That Elijah is here. Now, verse 9 uh, and 10 is about Obadiah speaking. Verse 9 says, but he said, understand this, this is Obadiah speaking. And he says, what khatat have I committed that you are handing your servant over to Achav to execute me, cause me to die? As surely as Jehovah, your God lives. So here we have Jehovah. And by hint, your God, your Elohim. As we have seen yesterday, this is spoken by a non-native. And so Obadiah is a non-native. So was the woman who was a widow yesterday from Sidon or Sidon. And as I mentioned up front, Obadiah appears not to be a native. And so this would help us in understanding. It is not Jehovah, our God, but is Jehovah, your God, which also tells us that this Obadiah is something like Ruth, Agar, had embraced the nation, the God of Israel, as well as the faith of Israel. It says, as surely as your God lives, this is something that is very true. He says, there is no nation or kingdom to which my master has not sent word to search for you. It means that Achav has been searching for Elijah. Then it is said, and whenever they say he is not here, he makes the kingdom or nation swear that they could not find you. Now, this terminology here is this. The word swear literally means to swear by the name of God. Because swearing by the name of God means that it must be absolutely true. If not, you will die. That is how Achav is trying to establish whether anyone is lying to him. But he couldn't find Elijah. Now, where did Elijah go? In chapter 17, he was in Sidon. He wasn't across into Syria or into Moab or Ammon or Edom or wherever else. So it was a different place because he was there by the coastal area in Lebanon. Verse 11. Now understand, this is still Obadiah speaking. Obadiah is explaining to Elijah, you are asking me to go and tell my master Achav that Elijah is here. Did you know that my master has been looking high and low and forcing everyone to swear that they haven't seen you? And yet now you are saying, go and say to your master, behold, Elijah. And then Obadiah is thinking, you know what happens if I go and say that? Verse 12 is, and it will come about when I leave you now that the wind, not spirit, the wind of Jehovah will suddenly carry you to where I do not know. This would be a supernatural event. It does appear that people in those days knew that if there is such a thing like the man of God being whoosh and suddenly disappeared and carried away, it is thought of as the wind of God that blew you away suddenly and you disappeared. And so he says, and to where I do not know. And so what happens when I tell King Achav that you are there and then suddenly God does this and suddenly you disappear? What's going to happen? So when I come and inform Achav and he can't find you, he will kill me. He thinks that I'm playing a joke on him. Though your servant here have feared the Lord from my youth. Now, this is a very telling picture. This is how godly Obadiah is. So he understands that God can work in mysterious ways and God can protect Elijah because God had kept Elijah away from Achav. The king of Israel went looking for him and still couldn't find, had killed all the prophets, and yet 100 of them were saved. But whatever happens, in his mind, he would think that Achav is wanting to kill Elijah. God is certainly going to protect him again. Verse 13 says this, has it not been reported to my master what I did when Jezebel killed the prophets of the Lord, that I hid 100 prophets of the Lord by 50s in a cave and provided them with bread and water? Now, this whole idea is that people seem to know that there was the fear of God in Obadiah in protecting the prophets of God. And it appears that Achav may have spared his life, but Jezebel may not. And so the whole picture here is given that the next time that Ahav is played out, like telling him that there is Elijah and then Elijah is not to be found, that would be a problem. Now, there are people who say that, well, it may be common knowledge, but neither Ahav nor Jezebel knew, which then seems to say that the people are sympathetic to the prophets of God as well as Obadiah. Verse 14, still Obadiah speaking, yet now you are saying, go say to your master, behold, Elijah, he will kill me. So it's just giving an argument that there is no way that he's going to see Ahav. Because if he goes and see Ahav and Ahav wants to kill Elijah, and God protects Elijah and hides him away somewhere, then Obadiah is exposed. Now, verse 15 tells us this. It says, and then, and then Elijah said, as surely as Jehovah Sabaoth is alive, or as long as he lives, before whom I stand to his face, I will certainly make him see me. And so this would be the picture. Present myself is be seen of Ahav this day. This day. Or today. This is an urgent thing to be explained to Obadiah, not to worry. His fear is not founded. Being convinced of that, verse 16, and then after that conversation, Obadiah went to meet Ahav and inform him about Elijah. Now, interestingly speaking, then Ahav went to meet Elijah. Now, again, this word meet is to encounter. So we have Elijah, and we are told in this word meet is Ahav was going back and forth looking for perhaps some springs of water, some grass. And so after he's been told by Obadiah, sent by Obadiah, he was going this way, and they have an encounter. This would be the meeting. And in verse 17, it says, when Ahav saw Elijah, Ahav said to him, now in that conversation, we need to explain some words. Is this you, the cause of disaster to Israel? Now, this word, the cause of disaster, says it comes from a word troublemaker. He thinks that Elijah was the cause of the trouble. He is the one who stirs up trouble. Now, what trouble do they have now? No rain. And it is ascribed to Elijah that he is the cause of the trouble. He has to be killed. And now Ahav is wondering, is that really you? You dare come and see me? You are the cause of every problem that is in Israel today. The cause of no water has led to people being hungry, short of food, and the animals are about to die. Now, that is the picture that is in Ahav's mind. Now, we will end with verse 18 to give us a clear picture of the the verse that responds to this accusation. We have verse 18 and in verse 19, and then we will end here. Let's look at verse 18. He said, that's Elijah. So Elijah said this, I have not brought disaster to Israel. I am not the cause of this disaster, but you and your father's house have, because you have abandoned the commands of the Lord and you have followed the Baals. And that is the English way of translating. So let me explain this to you. You have abandoned, you have forsaken, you have turned your backs. That's the word here. It is you and your father's house, because you have been serving idols. You have abandoned the instructions of God. Do not make any idols, whether it is of the skies above and the land and under the land. That these are all creatures that God made. You don't make any, but you have done that. The next word here is and this is an and then. After you disregarded the instructions of God, especially in the 10 statements or the 10 commandments, you have followed the Baals. Now, this word here, the Baals, shouldn't be translated this way. This would be the Baalim. It's like El, and the plural is Elohim. The singular is Baal, and the plural is Baalim. Now, one of the things that you find in the Hebrew language is that Elohim can be used as a name of God. And so the Baalim is also seen as the name of Baal. And that's essentially how we can read this. That the Baalim would be the name of the lords, and these would be the idol lords. And so Elijah says, not my problem. It is your problem, and God is showing you a supernatural famine caused by no rain. And in Deuteronomy chapter 11, yesterday we looked at it, that God is honoring his word, that if you abandon his words and go after other gods, he is going to turn off the tap in the sky. Now, in verse 19, we read this. Now then, now, and this is the not and then, it would be now, this moment, at this time. You should send and collect to me all Israel. Now, this word all Israel means all the tribes of Israel. And by context, this would be all the tribes of the northern kingdom, and bring them to Mount Carmel. And together with 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of the Asherah tree. That would mean the Asherah, that is a woman deity who eats at Jezebel's table. First, all the tribes of Israel. 2, 450 prophets of Baal, 3 400 prophets of Asherah. And so, with this, what Ahav would be thinking is they are gathering the Israelites to pray, to plead for rain. That is likely to be in the mind of Ahav. And under his charge, it is likely that the 400 prophets of the Baalim or Baal would be under his care, and the other 400 prophets of the Asherah is under Jezebel. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is because as we read on, and we will complete this tomorrow, that only 450 prophets of Baal showed up. But the 400 prophets of the Asherah, who eat at the Jezebel's table with special privileges, did not show up. And that would be how we would read this text. It is a request to Ahav to prepare this scenario. Ahav doesn't know what is going to happen. In his mind, the problem is no rain. And so, in his mind, what Elijah wanted to do was to legitimately gather all of these to plead to God to bring rain. Now, maybe the prophets, the 400 prophets of Asherah, didn't think much because they would thought that no, this would be Elijah trying to challenge them and something would go wrong. The ones that is of Baal would be under the care of Ahav. They had no choice, but they had to show up, even though they may be suspecting something is amiss. But Ahav appears to be the king that is quite naive, that this is about Elijah trying to plead to God to bring rain. And with this, we come to the end of our session today at verse 19.